What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazika, the Fight Guys, and also a Forbes contributor. And I want to talk about what happened in the wee hours of the morning in Singapore at UFC Fight Night 162. I got an opportunity to watch the main event just now. Just clicked it off. Ben Askren against Damian Maia, and unfortunately for Ben Askren, he took his second consecutive stoppage loss with the UFC, which drops his record to 1-2 at the promotion. And the only victory that he does have came with some controversy, even though I do also believe that it was the right decision to call his victory over Robbie Lawler a submission win. I thought Robbie did go out. But we know against Jorge Masvidal in his last fight, he was knocked out in a record-setting 5 seconds with a flying knee from hell. And then like I said, in the wee hours of the morning on Saturday, he loses by third round submission to Damian Maia. So there's a lot of things here. You know, one of the first questions that someone might ask is should Ben Askren be done at this point? Somebody might ask that question. Now, some might feel like that's an irrational or a too quick of a question to be asking, or maybe where you're being a little hasty, you're jumping the gun, you're overreacting to a defeat. But there is a reason why somebody might say that, because Ben Askren is at a point in his career where he's accomplished so much. Being a world champion with Bellator, a world champion with one championship, an Olympic level wrestler. He had accomplished one of the most accomplished amateur wrestlers in the history of everybody who's ever made the transition to mixed martial arts, right? He's also a very high profile personality because he is so good on social media. He is so good in needling guys and getting under people's skin, and he's made quite the name for himself, for better or worse, during the short period of time he's been with UFC since the trade that brought him here, or brought him to the UFC from one championship that sent Demetrius Johnson to one championship. So when you are as high profile as Ben Askren, people expect more success, and they expect it quicker than they would maybe someone else. And they're not going to be as willing to put your losses into perspective, because there's a perfectly good explanation and there's a perfectly good way to put all of this stuff into perspective and say, oh, these losses are more than respectable. Jorge Masvidal is a heck of a fighter. Now, losing to him in 5 seconds with a flying knee is kind of hard to escape the humiliation of that defeat. But Masvidal is not just some guy, right? Masvidal is a heck of a fighter, a veteran. He's been around. He's a really good fighter. He's going to main event UFC 244 against Nate Diaz. I think we all pretty much know that's going to happen now that Nate Diaz has been completely cleared of what went on with the adverse findings in the drug test. And Damian Maia he's not the most exciting guy to a lot of people unless you have a real appetite and appreciation for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a high level. Most people don't like Damian Maia. Those guys, unless you're in that number, you don't like Damian Maia. I happen to love mixed martial arts. I happen to love all martial arts, and I can respect all disciplines. And Damian Maia, in my opinion, is the greatest pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner that has ever transitioned to mixed martial arts. And yes, I know. I watched Royce Gracie. Royce Gracie is actually who introduced this sport to me. But all things considered, I would give Damian Maia the edge because Royce Gracie is great, and as much of a pioneer as he was, Royce Gracie was dominating people with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when not as many of the athletes in MMA were cross-trained across multiple disciplines. You had a lot of people came in strong in one discipline and hardly experienced it all in the other. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is such a strong base because most of these conflicts, especially if a guy isn't trained in takedown defense and that sort of thing, a lot of it ends up on the ground. And if you cannot conduct yourself down there, you're going to get dominated. And that's a lot of what we saw with Royce Gracie during his heyday. Damian Maia dominates guys on the ground in an era where everybody has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach. Everybody is way more familiar with the discipline than they were 25, 30 years ago. And case in point, on Saturday morning, he submits one of the greatest wrestlers that we've seen. So you might not consider him to be the most exciting guy to watch, but he gets it done, and he is a genius in his discipline. So there's no shame in losing to him. There's no shame in losing to Masvidal. There's no shame in taking some nasty shots from Robbie Lawler, withstanding them, and then securing the victory with a bulldog choke. There's no shame in that either. But when you're Ben Askren, the clock is sped up. When you're Ben Askren and you've won titles in two other promotions, and your whole purpose for coming to the UFC was to win a title in a third promotion, everything gets magnified. And I think Ben Askren knows that. He's a very bright guy. He understands that. And so we go back to the question, is he done? All of those things considered, considering both ends of the spectrum, considering both extremes, people who are jumping up and down saying, oh, he's done, he's trash, he just got finished twice, he got finished by Damian Maia, which some of those takes come from a place of ignorance. And then even to the other end of the spectrum, where people are saying he lost to Damian Maia, he's an all-time great in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He lost to Jorge Masvidal, he's a fantastic fighter. He beat Robbie Lawler. Somewhere in the middle, right, is the way you have to look at that. And in the middle, I'm saying he's not washed, but we're getting close. We're getting close. And when I say washed, I'm not saying washed as if you can't beat anybody else. It's just washed in a sense of the expectations, the standards for Ben Askren are higher. So he cannot afford to lose another fight, especially in his next fight, against anyone of any stature, of anyone at all, but especially at this point with Ben Askren, I think he has to go a little bit further down in the rankings, in the welterweight rankings. He has to beat someone maybe who is an up and coming type of prospect, someone that people know, but not necessarily a top contender. Damian Maia was just on the outsides of that, even though it's probably disrespectful to have him there, seeing as though he went the distance with Tyron Woodley. He owns a victory over Jorge Masvidal. He just beat Ben Askren. He took Kobe Covington to a very competitive fight that also went the distance, marked Kobe Covington's face up. Damian Maia is a legitimate guy, so he shouldn't be too far away from title contention. But because he's just not a spectacular personality or an exciting fighting style, he's been, he's had to work like crazy just to get anything. But Ben Askren needs to take on somebody in his next fight who's an up and coming fighter of some sort, who he can hopefully get the victory for, and that's hopefully on his side. If he loses the next fight, there's really no salvaging a 1-3 start in the UFC. Not for Ben Askren. It just isn't. I don't know where he would go from there. I know from a competitive standpoint, it would be hard for him to accept and just swallow the concept that you came to the UFC after all of the hoopla and the talk that went on for years about him being the greatest fighter, or arguably the greatest fighter never to compete in the UFC. And then now he gets there and goes 1-3. That would be a really tough failure for him to accept. So I would be surprised if he doesn't give it one more go. But if he loses again, it's going to be really hard to make a case for him to keep this going. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like. Also subscribe. I appreciate you watching. As always, God bless and peace.